Can you imagine the day when Rome almost knelt before becoming the center of one of the greatest empires and dynasties in history? In the 4th century BC, Italy was a true mosaic of peoples, cities, and tribes struggling for autonomy. The Romans, determined to consolidate their influence, advanced further and further, facing Etruscans, Samnites, and even Gauls in battles that tested their resilience. But something even greater was coming, and the tension was rising like a volcano ready to erupt. For a long time, Rome was considered just another expanding city-state, but its victories brought power and prestige. Military roads, like the Appian Way, became vital arteries for swiftly mobilizing troops. This logistical control allowed Rome to maneuver with incredible agility, surprising its adversaries. However, with each new conquest, new rivals emerged, suspicious of this city that would not stop growing. The Greek cities of southern Italy, known as Magna Graecia, possessed culture and armies inspired by Hellenistic tradition. When Tarentum felt threatened by Roman advances, it sought help from a foreign king, someone capable of truly staving off Rome's power. This is how the name Pyrrhus of Epirus emerged, a leader whose army was not only based on powerful Macedonian phalanxes, but also brought something the Romans had never faced before: war elephants. As the Roman senators calculated risks and evaluated strategies, Pyrrhus's army was landing on Italic soil. Many believed this confrontation could break Rome's growing dominance. After all, how could one confront a force that combined Hellenistic tactics with giant, intimidating creatures? What if this were the end of the Roman dream of unifying the peninsula? The arrival of Pyrrhus of Epirus in Italy was met with apprehension by the Romans. Did you know that at that time, he brought about 20 war elephants, something Rome had never seen up close? This surprise made the legionaries, accustomed to facing more conventional enemies, tremble before this new threat. The Battle of Heraclea would serve as a trial by fire to test the resilience of the legions. In this initial confrontation, Pyrrhus strategically utilized the Macedonian phalanx, advancing like a wall of spears that became practically impenetrable. The psychological impact of the elephants was devastating, spreading panic and confusion within the Roman ranks. Even with their characteristic discipline, Rome suffered a harsh defeat, shaken both on the battlefield and in military reputation. Some generals in the Roman camp suggested that the best course of action would be to negotiate or even retreat, but the Senate remained firm. The idea of surrendering even after such a significant loss did not align with the pride of a city that already saw itself destined for greatness. This refusal surprised Pyrrhus, who expected to intimidate Rome and force it to sign a treaty favorable to the king of Epirus. The Eternal City displayed a characteristic that would define its military history in the centuries to come: a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. If they did not fold even in the face of elephants and phalanxes, could Pyrrhus truly subjugate them? In Asculum, Pyrrhus once again encountered the Romans on the front lines, ready to test his new tactics. The Roman army, still inexperienced, against the phalanx adapted its use of throwing weapons and flexible formations, trying to dodge the strongest points of the enemy's spears. Nonetheless, Pyrrhus achieved victory, but at a cost he could never have imagined. It was in this clash that the term Pyrrhic victory emerged, representing a triumph with such great losses that it borders on defeat. Pyrrhus's own officers expressed concern over the number of soldiers lost, realizing that the Roman legions were resilient and seemed to multiply with each new battle. Pyrrhus, faced with these casualties, reportedly declared that another victory like that would ruin him completely. For Rome, even the defeat at Asculum provided a valuable lesson. Each confrontation was a laboratory of tactics. The Roman ability to learn and reorganize quickly would become a powerful weapon in future wars, including against other Hellenistic peoples. This accumulated resilience fed the sentiment that, despite losing the battle, they had not yet lost the war. If Pyrrhus continued to force such costly battles, how many victories could he endure before his army was completely depleted? Tension grew like a rope stretched to its limit, leading to the question, what would be the next move of a king beginning to see cracks in his conquest plan? As Rome tried to rise again, a plea for help reached Pyrrhus. The Greeks of Sicily were pleading for assistance against the Carthaginians, rivals threatening the control of the island. Excited by the idea of extending his power, Pyrrhus crossed the sea to engage in battles on Sicilian soil. His arrival brought initial victories in the sense that he could unify the Greek cities against Carthage. However, the brutality and ambition of Pyrrhus began to generate distrust. He imposed strict rules and demanded heavy tributes, alienating precisely those he had promised to save. The lack of diplomacy undermined his local support, turning former allies into suspicious adversaries ready to sabotage him. This behavior ended up repeating a pattern that Rome would learn to avoid. Conquering without offering stability can be a fatal mistake. In the future, when dominating distant regions, the Romans would try to integrate local elites and offer citizenship to loyal allies. This care in building bridges was crucial for the success of later imperial campaigns. Losing support in Sicily, Pyrrhus realized that his position in Italy was also at risk. It was clear that being victorious on multiple fronts required more than military strength. Political strategy and governance skills were necessary. How would Pyrrhus deal with the tightening siege in both Sicily and the mainland? Returning to Italy for a final push, Pyrrhus gathered his forces in search of a decisive victory. But the Romans were no longer the same terrified soldiers from Heraclea. Now they were familiar with Hellenistic tactics and had adopted countermeasures against war elephants. The Battle of Benevento became the turning point that sealed Pyrrhus's fate. In this confrontation, Rome exploited the flexibility of its legions to undermine the Macedonian phalanx at weak points while neutralizing the impact of the elephants with specially trained formations. Pyrrhus's army, worn out and lacking reinforcements, could not withstand the coordinated offensive of the Romans. The defeat was undeniable and precipitated Pyrrhus's definitive departure from Italy. With the departure of the king of Epirus, Rome began to dominate the entire Italian peninsula, solidifying itself as the greatest regional power. This triumph opened the door to new developments such as the Punic Wars against Carthage, and the subsequent expansion that would transform Rome into a true empire. Now, without major internal rivals, the eternal city soared ever higher. The shadow of defeat that loomed over Rome and Heraclea and Asculum dissipated on the horizon. However, the experience of almost being defeated was crucial in shaping Roman military culture, making it even more persistent and cunning. And like any fascinating story, the lessons learned there would not soon be forgotten. The Pyrrhic Wars taught the Romans that facing phalanxes required innovation, and the use of throwing weapons helped break dense formations. This learning would be crucial in the future when Rome faced more advanced Hellenistic armies, such as those of Macedonia and Egypt. Tactical flexibility became the hallmark of the legions, capable of adapting according to the enemy. Moreover, the initial shock against war elephants formed a repertoire for future battles, reminiscent of confrontations with Hannibal in the Second Punic War. The elephants, once causing panic, ceased to be a mystery for Rome. The use of incendiary weapons, wedge formations, and targeted attacks on the animals' legs became recurring strategies. Another decisive aspect was the Roman insistence on continuing to fight even after harsh defeats. That mentality of never retreat, never surrender became part of the military essence of the Republic and later the Empire. With each failure, the legions returned more prepared, integrating lessons from each confrontation into their ranks. Thus, the defeats of yesterday paved the way for the victories of tomorrow, transforming Rome into an almost unstoppable war machine. But with such military power, could politics stay ahead of the ambitions of the generals? By defeating Pyrrhus, Rome gained not only hegemony over the Italian peninsula, but also a vast reservoir of soldiers and resources. The enlistment of allied peoples from Italy generated increasingly larger armies, creating a military force that impressed the Mediterranean world. It was the embryo of an empire that would expand into distant lands. This initial unification of Italy allowed Rome to strengthen its infrastructure by building roads, bridges, and fortifications. Each geographical conquest was accompanied by a policy of integration, granting varying degrees of citizenship to loyal allies. This cooperation model was key to success against powers like Carthage, Macedonia, and the East. With the peninsula under control, the Eternal City was ready for greater challenges, heading into a collision course with other empires and dynasties of the period. The First Punic War would be the next great test, where Rome would fight for naval and territorial supremacy against Carthage. From then on, trade routes and foreign taxes would shape the economic foundation of an ascending empire. If the Pyrrhic Wars demonstrated Rome's willingness to fight to the bitter end, their dominance over Italy showed that they had much more to conquer. But what kind of conflicts would arise when another giant, like Carthage, was put to the test against Roman power? With Pyrrhus out of the way, a significant obstacle remained in the western Mediterranean. Carthage, a rich and powerful city-state that controlled maritime trade routes. This clash, known as the Punic Wars, would present Rome with challenges such as the legendary Hannibal, who crossed the Alps with elephants. The victory against Pyrrhus had taught the Romans to never underestimate an unexpected enemy. Meanwhile, the definitive conquest of Greece and the Near East was also on the horizon, as Rome would face Hellenistic kingdoms like Macedonia and the Seleucids. The training during the time of Pyrrhus was essential for combating phalanxes on this new front. Now the legions not only had the determination, but also the know-how to overcome armies inspired by the Macedonian model. These disputes in the East and West transformed Rome into a global power, bringing its culture and legions to overseas territories. With each victory, the Senate and generals grew more powerful, generating internal political tensions that centuries later would exacerbate during the imperial period. Personal ambitions, betrayals, and coups became as common as foreign wars. Thus, the seed planted during the Pyrrhic Wars blossomed into increasingly audacious conquests. Nevertheless, the memory of nearly being defeated remained alive in the Roman imagination, ensuring that the spirit of vigilance and military renewal stayed strong. But what would the next step be when the entire Mediterranean was under Roman control? The Pyrrhic Wars were the catalyst for a revolution that transformed Rome into the master of Italy, ready to face large confrontations in pursuit of hegemony. This series of conflicts not only revealed the strength of an army that never accepted final defeat, but also shaped the mentality of a people willing to sacrifice for the glory of their city. Had Pyrrhus triumphed, perhaps the Hellenistic world would have taken Rome's place in the West. The central message of this story is clear. In the face of giant obstacles, determination and the ability to learn from failures can change the destiny of a nation. Rome did not conquer an empire overnight. It faced setbacks that nearly brought it down, but each fall opened the door to an even stronger comeback. This is the legacy that inspires generations to this day, reminding us of the value of persisting even when defeat seems inevitable. Now we want to know from you, could Pyrrhus have stopped the rise of one of the greatest empires of all time? How would the history of the West have been influenced if Rome had been halted at the beginning of its expansion? Leave your thoughts in the comments, as your perspective enriches this historical debate. If you enjoyed this content, subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and share this story with your friends and family. This way, you help keep alive the journey of Rome and so many other empires and dynasties that shaped the world. Thank you for staying with us until the end, and see you next time.